Hey folks, welcome into the News 12 Now desk. Thanks for joining us. We have got a live feed from Washington, D.C. right now. Let me go ahead and pull this up real quick. This is a meeting that we've been telling you about was going to happen for a while now. This is going to be with Senator Jon Ossoff, military families from Fort Gordon, as well as some top officials from the Army, and they're going to be discussing military housing on post. This is something we've covered extensively. If you've watched these News 12 Now segments over the last week or so, you'll see Meredith Anderson and I have had a number of in-depth discussions about this. And if you missed any of those are up on our website and on our YouTube page, so be sure to check them out there. But we are hopefully going to learn some new things today. Senator Ossoff is expected to release a report today. Let me pull this up real quick. Senator Ossoff is expected to release a report today talking about some findings from their investigation that they launched about housing on post there at Fort Gordon. This is something that's been on Senator Ossoff's radar for over a year now. It was actually about a year ago when they went to Washington, to Capitol Hill, and subpoenaed Balfour Beatty to come and speak under oath and testify about what was going on down there at Fort Gordon. So this is kind of the first step in a very long process. We've got inspections going on in every housing unit at Fort Gordon right now, 1,700 units at Fort Gordon, and this is just the first of about 50 installations across the country that Balfour Beatty is in charge of. So they are not, last we heard, expected to be there today. They were invited, but again, not expected to be there. So there you see, it looks like Senator Ossoff just walked in there. So we'll go ahead and pull this up. I'm going to pop back in every now and then if there's any big info that happens, or just to kind of give you guys a refresher on what's going on as more people join in here. But for now, I will turn it over to the meeting, and I'll be popping back in a few minutes.
Good morning. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you first of all to our witnesses for your participation today as part of my office's ongoing efforts to ensure the quality and safety of housing on Department of Defense installations in Georgia and nationwide. Thank you also to my staff who have worked so diligently to sustain our oversight efforts for these last 2 years. One of the first official acts I took upon entering office was to meet with service members and their families at installations across Georgia, including at Fort Gordon near Augusta, to hear about their experiences. I heard over and over again the anger and frustration that residents on military installations felt about the substandard quality of housing on post. These issues aren't new, and they're not limited to Georgia. In the 1990s, concerns about substandard military housing operated by the Department of Defense prompted Congress to pass a law requiring that DoD outsource housing on post to private contractors. But in the intervening decades, Congress has continued to hear complaints from across the country about the condition of these homes. Chronic problems with mold exposing service members and their families to serious and potentially long-term health consequences. Housing companies that are slow to respond to work orders and perform shoddy and low-quality work. After hearing from these families at Fort Gordon, I launched a bipartisan investigation as chair of the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations into housing conditions on military installations in Georgia and across the country. That bipartisan investigation, which culminated in a hearing in April of last year, found that Balfour Beatty staff and executives failed to evaluate whether mold was present in homes, failed to properly address positive mold findings, and failed to otherwise accurately document and report the status of work orders to the Army and to residents. That bipartisan investigation has already spurred positive changes. The Army immediately suspended incentive fees for Balfour Beatty at Fort Gordon, limiting the company's profits from those operations. And following pressure from my office, the Army also committed to conducting unit by unit, that is home by home, inspections of all living quarters, including privatized homes at Fort Gordon. Last week, I personally observed the beginning of these inspections, and I'll have more to say on that process when it concludes. Finally, the Army launched its own investigations into housing conditions at Fort Gordon, and my staff have closely studied the results and findings of those investigations as we make further recommendations for Balfour Beatty and for the Army. A year has passed since we unveiled our findings in April of 2022, a year during which Balfour Beatty has had the opportunity to address the concerns raised in that investigation and in subsequent reports. My team has spent the last several months conducting a follow-up investigation focused specifically on Fort Gordon to determine whether and to what extent these deficiencies have been addressed. The present investigation involved dozens of interviews and a review of thousands of pages of documents and reports, many of which were commissioned by the Army to scrutinize Balfour Beatty's practices at Fort Gordon. Our follow-on investigation has identified a few clear areas of improvement. Balfour Beatty has stated that it has hired more maintenance staff at Fort Gordon, that it has put new quality assurance measures for gas into place, and that it has expanded education and training for its technicians so they can fulfill work orders more promptly and more accurately. Balfour Beatty must sustain these efforts. At the same time, the present investigation has highlighted several persistent areas of concern. In particular, the investigation found that Balfour Beatty continues struggling to ensure the technical quality of maintenance work, to consistently identify and remediate mold in tenant homes, to ensure the accuracy and integrity of all work orders submitted, and to adequately plan for the medium and long-term sustainability of the housing project at Fort Gordon. Over the past 5 months, my staff have compiled these findings and recommendations into a report, which can be found through the congressional record that was compiled for yesterday, April 17th. Before we begin, I note that an invitation was extended to Balfour Beatty to participate in today's event. Officials from the company declined to come and answer questions, though they have met with my team and provided documents in response to our requests. But given that this same company pled guilty to DOJ charges for defrauding the U.S. military and says they take seriously the need to improve their operations, their unwillingness to answer questions in a public setting calls into question their commitment to transparency and their commitment to improvement. I will sustain my oversight to hold Balfour Beatty accountable and ensure they provide only safe, healthy housing for service members and their families. Today we will hear from the families who have joined us to share their personal stories living in Balfour Beatty housing at Fort Gordon. We will also hear from the Director of Operations at the Safe Military Housing Initiative, who will share her perspective on the major concerns of tenants who live in Balfour Beatty homes. I again thank the witnesses for joining us today and for speaking up not only on behalf of their own families, but on behalf of all others living in privatized military housing. Fundamentally, this is about the health and welfare of military service members, their spouses, and their kids. It's a basic issue of health, safety, and justice, as well as core to military readiness. We will also hear today from senior officials from the U.S. Army, who will update us on their ongoing efforts to ensure safe, quality housing for military families, as well as their efforts to improve oversight of Balfour Beatty and other military housing providers. I want to make one last point before we begin. I understand that someone in a leadership position at one of our witnesses' home installations called her last night as she was preparing to testify here today, asked her about the substance of her testimony, and inquired whether she would be testifying about them or their colleagues. I find that deeply disturbing. Service members and their families must be able to speak up without fear of retaliation, and I will continue to monitor this situation carefully to ensure that remains the case. I will now introduce each of our witnesses and ask each to provide a brief opening statement. We are joined this morning by Ashley Porras, a former Balfour Beatty tenant at Fort Gordon, by Joy Vieira, a former Balfour Beatty tenant at Fort Gordon, by Aaron Greer, a current Balfour Beatty tenant at Fort Gordon, and by Brianna Barnhart, Director of Operations, Safe Military Housing Initiative. In the second panel, we will hear from Rachel Jacobson, the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Installations, Energy, and the Environment, and Lieutenant General Kevin Verrain, Army Deputy Chief of Staff for the G9 Directorate. Ms. Boris, you may begin with your opening statement.
Good morning, Senator Ossoff. It is my honor to participate as a witness in this proceeding. Let me tell you about my family. My name is Ashley Pors. My husband, Ruben, is a drill sergeant who is stationed at Fort Gordon since June of 2021. We have 4 amazing and vibrant children. They are all under the age of 11. We lived in on-base housing managed and maintained by Balfour Beatty. I'm here today to testify about the problems we have had with Balfour's callous mismanagement of our housing and the inadequate representation military families have. RCI stands for Resident Communities Initiative, the Army's organization responsible for helping military families and their housing issues. It is their responsibility to bridge the gap between us and Balfour. Here are a few examples of my family's terrible experiences. My family moved into Balfour housing in June of 2021. Since then, we have experienced, among other problems, mold, invasive moisture, rotting frames and doors, bathroom issues, failing toilets, discrepancies in the work orders, and failures to follow policies. Each problem has required many phone calls, emails, meetings, dozens in total, if not more, with Balfour and RCI staff. Scheduled meetings turned out to be no-shows. Meetings that happened boiled down to invasions of problems and Balfour denying, refusing, or incompetently addressing problems for which Balfour is wholly responsible for. Our initial walkthrough of the Balfour residence we lived in was on June 12, 2021. It was subpar of what a move-in ready home should be. We were told we had 2 options. We either take this unit or remain in the hotel at our own expense until another one opened up. We were notified that could take up to 3 months. Staying in the hotel was not an option for us. We moved in and then quickly discovered we had a very leaky roof. On June 18th, it rained. We put in a work order, and at first, nothing was done. The solution offered by the Balfour maintenance worker who came by was for us to put a bucket underneath the leak until their contractor could come out. This ordeal took about 2 months to get completed. We have had work orders put in due to vents with mold, excessive moisture, and leaking water coming from the drywall on the side of our bathtub in the master bathroom. It was a consistent problem, and we repeatedly complained. Incredibly, Balfour blamed us. Toxic mold has been a constant and dangerous problem. I noticed my family, especially our children, were getting sick more frequently, had constant headaches, bloody noses, change of mood and appetite, and were always congested. My once vibrant children were not vibrant anymore. On August 30th, 2022, Balfour cut into our master bathroom drywall to disprove the mold I had been speaking about. We were not offered the opportunity to live elsewhere while they made their assessment. The next day, I found black and green mold in the drywall. I called my husband crying and distraught. At the time, he was attending an Army senior leadership course out of state. To say he felt helpless was an understatement. He called his chain of command, who promptly came to our home along with Balfour, the environmentalist, and RCI. The environmentalist said it was not mold, but told maintenance to put tape over the hole. Our home inspection was then set up. Again, Balfour and RCI assured me that everything was fine. I continued to question the mold on the wall. Out of frustration for my questions, Balfour then called their environmentalist to inspect again. This time, he confirmed it was mold. Had Balfour done its job right, this issue could have been fixed much earlier, and it wasn't. Out of desperation, on September 27th, 2022, we had an independent mold inspector company come to assess our home. The inspector spent approximately 8 hours thoroughly inspecting and used equipment designed to detect mold. He concluded that we should get out of the house as soon as possible. The next day, we vacated and moved to a hotel. On September 30th, I received a written confirmation from the mold inspector. It said that our house was deemed unfit for human occupancy. I reported this to Belford, who showed no concern about my family's health and safety. Instead, they were upset that we had allowed someone who wasn't hired by them to go into the house. We told Belford that we moved out due to the mold inspector's findings and that we would not have our family living in that house ever again. Belford's mold inspector found nothing. On October 10th, he told us he did not see any mold in the house. We were never given a written report, even though I repeatedly asked for it. The next day, on October 11th, we moved from the hotel into an Airbnb because Belford continued to threaten to stop paying for the hotel because they were given verbal confirmation that our house was deemed safe. I once again told them we are not going to be living in that house. On November 2nd, we permanently moved off base. The Army seemed to want to help our situation and had multiple meetings with Belford about resolving the issue. While RCI was of little help, I was able to get into direct contact with the Army Garrison Command, not by using RCI's policy, but by the open door policy. What we would like to see done. It is good that the attention Congress continues to bring to this matter. Unfortunately for my family, it has been a year too late. We strongly believe Belford's contract with the Department of Defense should immediately be suspended. Belford's gain should not be at the expense of the brave men and women who serve this country. Thank you for allowing my family's voice to be heard.
Thank you, Ms. Porras. Ms. Vieira, your opening statement, please, ma'am.
Thank you, Senator Ossoff. My name is Joy Vieira, and I am the mother of two. I am a homemaker and a proud military spouse of 14 years. My husband, Isaac, has been in the Army for 17 years. He spent the first 16 years in special operations. A change in his career path took us to Fort Gordon, Georgia for training. My testimony today is my concerns for my family's experience seeking on-base housing at Fort Gordon. In December of 2021, my husband received orders to report to Fort Gordon in the spring of 2022. We immediately sought on-base housing because we wanted him to be close to work so he could focus on his school. We drove cross-country from Washington State to Fort Gordon, and we had been promised housing available when we got there, and there was none. We stayed in hotels for 5 weeks, which was very difficult. We were a family of 4 with 2 dogs. We did not have much space. Our kids were in the middle of school, and our son was in the middle of his senior year. All of our personal belongings were still in storage. On May 27th, we were finally assigned a house on base, and we were excited to move in to get settled, but that night, things took a turn. Around 8 o'clock that night, after one of the upstairs toilets would not flush, I noticed liquid leaking from multiple spots in the ceiling in the kitchen. When it started flooding our dog's bed, I noticed that the liquid was brown. It was feces. There was poop in the water. Then the sewage started backing up into the bathtubs. It was filled with sewage bugs. It was a nightmare. We learned that Balfour had known about the plumbing issue before we moved in. They did not make us aware. It was almost midnight that night when we received notification from Balfour that we were being displaced and that we should move to a hotel in an unfamiliar area with 2 kids 2 dogs, and everything we brought with us. We spent the next month in short-term hotels, and our kids finished out the school year. In June, we received a second home from Balfour Beatty. I immediately noticed that the house was not clean. The backyard it had not been mowed. There was garbage in the bins, there were dead bugs on the floor, and there was dust and dirt on the surfaces. I noticed there was no airflow upstairs, so I checked the vents for a blockage, and then I found mold. As soon as I got in front of the vent, the air hit me in the face, my throat started to burn, and my chest got tight. I immediately let them know the condition of the house, and I was told there were no other houses available. We started looking for housing off-post because we knew that we could not trust Balfour Beatty to get this right. We spent thousands of dollars between hotel stays and finding a short-term apartment rental off-post after searching for weeks. Balfour Beatty's incompetence made a difficult thing moving across the country in the middle of the school year for a very short-term tour almost impossible. My family is very strong, but they should not have had to deal with that. We lived in temporary housing. My kids had nowhere to decompress. My husband had to look for other places after hours so he could study and focus on his school. Not having access to our belongings for almost 4 months was very difficult. Our son was unable to accept a job offer because the documentation he needed was still in storage, and we ran out of our daughter's diabetes medical supplies. Which were also in storage. The situation was very difficult, and it felt very hopeless. It made it hard for my husband to work because he was always popping in and out of school so that he could help us find a place to live and so that he could attend meetings on post about housing. Fort Gordon is a training base. Many families are there short-term, and they can't afford to live off post, which is why many of them choose to live on base. We were fortunate to find something that we could afford, but this is not the case for many families. Our families are at the mercy of companies like Balfour Beatty, who, regardless of the living conditions they are providing, are still somehow making their money off of the military families who are unfortunate enough to find themselves in their homes. This is not an isolated event. It is a systemic issue that is affecting many and undoubtedly affecting soldier morale. How can they focus on the mission when they are unsure if their families have a safe living environment? Please help us keep our families safe. Please hold Balfour Beatty accountable for their negligence and failure to maintain the houses that our families live in. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Vieira. Next, we will hear from Ms. Greer. Please proceed with your opening statement.
Senator Ossoff, my name is Erin Greer. My husband, Sergeant First Class Jeremy Greer, and I have lived in unexcusable living conditions for the last 6.5 years. Since September of 2016, we have been stationed at Fort Gordon, Georgia. My husband dedicated 27 years of his life to the Army He retired in late 2022, but due to continued illness and ongoing medical issues, he finally completed the retirement process this month, and we will soon be moving from on-post housing. I want you to know that the problems with Belfer have not gone away. The situation has gotten worse. I want to give you a few examples with the limited time that I have. From 2016 to 2023, I have placed multiple work orders for various problems with our house. In 2019, we started to notice water leaking out of the utility closet on the side of our house and down our driveway. The Belfer Beatty maintenance worker who came by said it was just condensation and left. He was wrong. A few weeks later, we discovered water flooding in the bathroom downstairs and the food pantry next to the utility closet. Black mold had started to become visible on the wall. Belfer came back. They only made minimum cosmetic repairs. The problem never went away. The workers were never really consistent with where the issue was coming from. I want to tell you next about the indoor toxic mold. On September 22nd, 2022, an independent mold inspector inspected our house. He did a thorough and lengthy assessment. To our shock, we were told our home, as well as our HVAC system, was completely infested with toxic mold. He provided a written certification that said our home was unfit for human occupancy. We immediately moved out. For about 2 weeks, we lived out of our car and on our porches because finances at the time did not allow a hotel stay for us. We avoided going into the house unless we absolutely had to. On October 4th, we gave Belfer the independent mold inspector certification. Belfer came in and saw in our house a partially collapsed ceiling in one of the bedrooms, mold on the ceiling of the utility closet outside, and it was also visible around the area of our front door. At first, they did nothing. On October 7th, we moved into a hotel where we stayed for 10 days. Belfer Beatty made the arrangements for us. In the meantime, Belfer brought in their own mold inspector. Days after their inspector came, they told me all repairs that were needed on our home were fixed, and we moved back in on October 17th. It wasn't fixed. There was black mold on the carpet. To this day, that mold is still on that carpet. The carpet was never changed out. I was never, ever given Belford's written mold inspection report from their independent inspector that they had visit our home, though I requested for it multiple times. We told Belford that the house was still unlivable. They disagreed with us, refused to refund any rental payments, and told us that we would pay penalties if we broke our lease. We felt we had no alternatives and stayed in the house until April of 2023. I want to tell you about what we've experienced in the house this month. On April 6, 2023, I put in an emergency work order for sewage flooding that covered the downstairs bathroom, a section of the hallway, and a small area of our dining room. The Belfer Beatty came in again and did not completely repair the downstairs bathroom. To this day, the bathroom remains unfinished. The bathroom floor and as well as the outside area of the bathroom are still covered in liquid sewage. Throughout the years, I have placed multiple work orders for this leaking toilet. Yet Belford's work order states the problem was fixed on April the 10th. That is not correct. I'm going to end by telling you about my family's many health problems. The symptoms we are experiencing include, but are not limited to, chronic fatigue, body aches, nosebleeds, blurred vision, migraine headaches, and memory loss. 2 of our beloved dogs, Nina and Bandit, passed away in 2022, we think years before their time. We believe that this was a result of the indoor toxic environment. Last week, I was exceptionally sick from the amount of time that I had spent in the house removing our belongings, preparing for our move. My recent experience in April was much worse than the earlier problems that we had experienced. Instead of Belfer Beatty improving their response, they have progressively gotten worse. My husband and I are grateful for the opportunity that you have given to us today. We're also very thankful for the light that you and your colleagues have shined on this very serious issue. I am very hopeful for a change for the better because having a safe and livable home on post should be available to all active duty, retired, and civilian occupants. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Greer. Finally, Ms. Barnhart.
Good morning, Senator Ossoff. I am the Director of Operations and Senior Advocate for the Safe Military Housing Initiative, which is a nonprofit organization founded by grassroots military spouses. We work to get quick resolution for our families who are suffering from unacceptable housing conditions and bigger pictures to bring the quality of military housing up to scientific standards. It is a privilege to share my perspective with you as you conduct oversight of Georgia military housing. Thank you for your commitment to our military families and communities. In 2019, I was one of SMHI's cases when our local on-base management failed to repair our own home that had raw sewage leaking in. SMHI brought swift resolution to my family, and since then I have sought to do the same for others across the nation. I have assisted countless families across the country in navigating on-base housing. Everything from mold, pests, lead, asbestos, HVAC, plumbing, electrical, overcharges, abuse, and retaliation. I help families who cannot resolve these issues on their own, even after months and months of battling with local management. Okay. The families run out of options before coming to SMHI. For every family that we advocate for, there are a dozen that still need help but do not find it. Family members of people serving our country need Balfour Beatty to respond timely and appropriately to dangerous conditions in their homes. Instead, families face retaliation for speaking out, disrespect, and blame from housing management on base. It imposes unnecessary hardships on the families of the people who signed up to serve their countries and distracts service members from their jobs. In some cases, it causes irreparable damage to military family members' health. Throughout my work with SMHI, I have observed trends and challenges facing military families living in Georgia, particularly at Fort Gordon and nationwide. Contractors house military families in homes with environmental hazards such as mold, lead, asbestos, and uncontrolled pests. This makes military families sick, stressed, and overwhelmed in trying to find a safe place for their family. Housing contractors tend to blame tenants first. Technicians lack training and expertise and supervision. The technicians regularly fail to create and communicate a plan to fix problems. They routinely miss appointments. They do not speak to tenants with respect. In most cases, in most SMHI cases, we find technicians have closed out work orders before the job has been completed, or that the technicians had improperly mislabeled or altered the scope of the work order. The Department of Defense and Balfour Beatty know that military housing has flaws in its constructions and recalled products, but do not affirmatively fix them. This is because under the Department of Defense and Balfour Beatty contracts, the Department of Defense has to approve reserve funding to fix non-routine maintenance. The Department of Defense must approve this funding, and Congress needs to appropriate more of it. Families are retaliated against for speaking out. While Balfour Beatty has improved on this issue in recent months, this company has a long track record of local managers retaliating against tenants who repeatedly raise issues with their substandard housing. Displacement costs the families. Longer commutes, more takeout and less cooking, off-site laundry, and other hardships. The bills rack up to the thousands. I have several recommendations for your consideration. First, on-base military housing should be held to national standards for safe living so that military families are not subjected to less safe housing than is available in the privatized market. Military families should not be treated as second-class citizens. Second, Balfour Beatty and the military contractors should not be allowed to close out work tickets without a resident's signature. This would prevent Balfour from making it appear as if they are being responsive to tenants' complaints, including by the relevant time standards, but in reality, closing unfinished tickets and opening new or incorrect ones. Third, for-profit military housing contractors and the Department of Defense must work together to affirmatively fix housing defects before residents complain. The contractors must bring these known issues to the attention of the Department of Defense. Then, the Department of Defense must work with the contractors to ensure that funding is available to remediate these issues in a timely manner. Fourth, military housing contractors must improve the quality of their technicians through increased training or increased salaries to attract skilled tradesmen and tradeswomen. Before I conclude my remarks, I wanted you to know that this story is not all bad. In some ways, Balfour Beatty has been better than other contractors. Senior managers at the vice president level are willing to meet with families face-to-face to create real-time plans for change. Balfour Beatty executives have been visiting bases, such as the twice-per-year community huddles and installations, where families have a chance to meet with the executive level for resolution. We just wish that the local managers at the bases below the vice president level would treat families with the same respect. Senator, substandard military housing conditions are a chronic problem across all installations. Today we are focusing on Fort Gordon and Balfour Beatty, but this problem is not limited to the state of Georgia. It is national in scope. We solve it through legislation, prioritizing military families and close, independent oversight, such as what we are doing in this hearing. The home's condition impacts the daily lives of our service members. We have to get it right, and we have to do better. Thank you, sir.
Thank you all for your testimony and for your presence here today. And I want to just touch on something at the outset that has been raised in all of your statements. And Ms. Vieira, you noted that this is something that's directly impacting the morale of our soldiers. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, please?
So our soldiers are, they have families, and they're families that a lot of times are living in military housing, and our soldiers are trusting these privatized housing companies to provide a living or a safe living environment so that when they are gone on deployment, they're not worrying about the health and safety of their families. They can focus on the mission. Not being able to focus on the mission is dangerous. And it just overall, it just brings down the soldier morale because they can't focus on anything other than their families.
Well said, Ms. Vieira, and I want to dig in a little bit more on the way that the presence of mold in your homes has been addressed by Balfour Beatty. Ms. Porras, when did you first alert Balfour Beatty that you were concerned about the presence of mold, and what did the company do to inspect your home for the presence of mold?
I had notified them periodically since we had moved in, because there was a patch on the side of the wall that looked discolorated, and I was advised by multiple maintenance workers that it's fine, it's just a not very good job. So I officially put in a work order in May, and when they finally confirmed the mold, it wasn't until August.
And you eventually hired a third-party inspector to examine the home, correct?
Correct.
Why did you feel you needed to do that?
Because I felt like they weren't giving accurate results, especially when they went from, no, you don't have any mold, let me prove it to you, to let's bring the environmentalist back out and, oh, it is mold. So I felt like they weren't being honest to begin with. And when I asked them what the procedure was to find out what kind of mold or if it was needing to be closed off, they said that they don't follow that. It's just off of visual inspection. So I wanted to get a fair and accurate review of the home.
And you provided a copy of the independent inspection report to my office, and we reviewed it. The inspector found visible mold growth on multiple drywall surfaces, as well as, quote, severe damage from one or more water intrusion events, visible mold growth and water damage in 2 hallway bathrooms, the master bathroom, multiple bedrooms, and the kitchen, concluded that your family's home was, quote, unfit for human occupancy, and that continued occupancy was, quote, highly discouraged, even if occupancy is temporary. Did you feel safe staying in your home after that?
No, we never returned except to remove belongings to move off post.
What was the impact of having to stay in hotels and Airbnbs? What was that like for your family?
It was horrible. I had 4 children to a 1-room hotel. In between going to school and their extracurricular activities, my husband, since he is a drill sergeant, he has crazy hours. He has to be there for his soldiers. So it really tore us apart because he's trying to hold his end while I'm trying to hold mine while we don't have a stable home.
And this gets back to this point about morale and national security and military readiness. I mean, Ms. Barnhart, in your experience, what's the impact on a soldier and a soldier's family of being displaced to a hotel for weeks or months, or having to pay out of pocket for an Airbnb, having to leave at, was it midnight, yeah. Ms. Vieira, having to leave in the middle of the night?
The impacts are vast. It affects our retention because soldiers, they serve for their families first and their country. And if their family is paying the price of their service, they don't want to re-enlist. They would rather take a civilian job and take chances off base. The impacts to our soldiers is they're stressed. They're supposed to be focused on the mission, but the mission starts at home. They can't focus on their jobs if their family is suffering. And the health effects speak for themselves. Our families are suffering.
And I would note, Ms. Barnhart, that is so well put, that the Army right now is struggling with recruitment.
Yes.
So retention of service members is and must be a high priority, correct?
Yes, and our lower enlisted soldiers, many of them are new to military housing. They enter the homes and they're dilapidated conditions, and there's long-term consequences to their health. If they're breathing in the mold spores, they are breathing in the mold spores that their families are breathing in. You see soldiers coming down with asthma, needing CPAP machines, and being discharged due to medical events.
Let's get into that.
Yes.
The health effects a little bit more. And Ms. Greer, you walked us through your experience with mold in your home. What was Balfour Beatty's reaction when you first alerted the company to what you suspected was the presence of mold in the home?
So the first time I initially brought this up to them was in 2019. And even though they had confirmed mold was present, their reaction, they kept us in the house despite me asking multiple times for us to be temporarily put someplace else. They came in and they painted over the wall in the pantry. And then they told me that they had completed their repairs and it was done. In 2022, their reaction, they showed no concern overall for the health and safety of our family. They were upset that we allowed an inspector to come in and drill holes in the walls. So there was never any real concern for health and safety overall.
And you, like Ms. Porras, Ms. Greer, wound up bringing in an independent inspector, is that right?
Correct.
And like Ms. Porras, and thank you, Ms. Greer, you provided my office a copy of that report. I'm going to brief the audience on some of those findings. Visible mold growth on multiple surfaces, that the metal surfaces of the HVAC system were covered in self-originating mold growth. Visible mold growth in the kitchen in 4 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, concluded that your family's home was also, like Ms. Porras, quote, unfit for human occupancy. Did you feel safe staying in your home after that inspection, Ms. Greer?
No, we did not, and they continued to keep us there even after they were given the statement saying that it was unfit for human occupancy. They actually didn't help us until October the 7th. They continued to keep us in there.
And so what did your family do? Where'd you stay? Where'd you sleep?
Our family, we tried not to be in the house as much as we could. At the time, we only had our little dog Bandit with us, so we stayed when I wasn't going to school and my husband wasn't going to doctor's appointments doing his retirement stuff. We stayed outside on the front porch. We would go out to our back porch. We spent hours outside. There were a couple of nights that we slept in our cars. There was even one night that my husband was talking about inflating an air mattress and putting it in the bed of his truck, simply because at that point in time, our family did not have the financial ability to pay for a hotel, because we were surrendering our housing allowance to Balfour Beatty, so we couldn't afford to pay to live in 2 places at once. And even though they knew this information, they knew we were living outside of the house, they continued to tell me that we had to wait until they brought in their own inspector before or even if we would be taken and temporarily put someplace else.
So you're sleeping on the porch and in your car?
Yes.
Because you can't safely sleep in the house?
Correct.
And let's talk about the financial impact, Ms. Barnhart, again, because you've seen so many cases like Ms. Greer's. We discussed the impact on soldier morale. For those who are tuned in on television and maybe aren't so familiar, walk us through the family finances of junior enlisted soldier, their spouse, a couple kids. There's not room in the budget for thousands of dollars on hotels and Airbnbs, right?
Correct. Even with the financial classes that the Department of Defense provides for lower enlisted soldiers, it is very difficult to be a one-income family. And most of our soldier families are one-income families, and it is the soldier's income alone that supports them. And it's not enough to be displaced and have your entire BAH going to housing. Even when you are displaced and housing is covering that cost, they only cover a portion of it. Balfour Beatty, it's $96 a day that they will cover for displacement. So you come out of pocket for the rest of that displacement cost.
And just to be clear, Ms. Barnett, that's only if they have displaced you. In other words, if they've told you to get out of the home. In Ms. Greer's case, where her family's sleeping on the porch and in the car because an independent inspector has deemed the house unsafe, but Balfour has not agreed, then there is no such compensation, correct?
Correct. There's also only a $5 a day compensation for meals. And because that came down with the NDAA language, $5 a day for meals is not enough. You can't go out today, right now, and purchase a full meal for one individual, let alone multiple for $5. And so the families come out of pocket for that cost as well. And that's even with the covered displacement. There are some installations that Balfour Beatty has that offers soldiers homes. However, I am not aware that Fort Gordon has displacement homes on the installation that can accommodate the families. Those homes would come with a kitchen, et cetera, and Balfour Beatty, if they displace you to those soldier homes, they refund your BAH for each day that you are in that home. They do not follow that same protocol when they displace you off the installation.
Thank you, Ms. Barnhart. Ms. Vieira, I've heard repeatedly from residents at Fort Gordon, including as recently as last week when I was on post and I held a town hall meeting with 40-plus enlisted personnel, how frustrated they are about the quality of maintenance work and the professionalism of the technicians who do that maintenance work, and the communication between the company and residents. So I'd like to ask you about the quality of the workmanship you experienced when receiving that kind of maintenance support while you were living on Fort Gordon, when Balfour Beatty responded to your work orders. You moved to Fort Gordon in April 2022. You walked us through how you weren't provided a home for over a month and you were living in a hotel during that period. Is that correct?
Yes.
Because there was no suitable home available.
There was none.
And so then May 2022, you finally have got, right, you and 2 kids?
Yes, 2 kids.
A senior in high school?
Yes.
One of them, 2 dogs?
Yes.
You and your husband? You've been in a hotel for a month.
Yes.
And finally, you get the opportunity to move into the home you've been waiting for, May 28th, 2022. The day after you move in, raw sewage is backflowing into the bathtubs, correct?
And falling from the ceiling.
And I've seen the photos.
Yes.
When you were speaking with my staff, you described a conversation that made you believe Balfour Beatty was aware of the problems with the sewage lines in that home, but had not fixed them before you moved in. Can you describe that conversation, please?
Yes. So I do not have much experience with the maintenance team simply because we were not in the home, either home, long enough to have any experience with them. I had experience with one maintenance tech, and he was very frustrated because he was being yelled at by his supervisor because he had come in and was trying to figure out where this leak was coming from. And his supervisor told him that it was a known issue and they just hadn't fixed it. And that's why he was mad that he was trying to figure out what it was.
But had anyone informed you before you moved in of this issue?
We had not been informed of anything. The only point that we grew concerned was when the toilet would not flush and all of a sudden we have liquid, like like water with poop falling from our ceiling into our kitchen with our groceries that we had just bought onto our dog bed. We had just moved cross country. Our kids had just spent a month in hotels. My son spent his 18th birthday in the hotel. He graduated high school while in that hotel. And now it's like, well, I'm sorry, kids, we're going to have to move again because now we can't use any of the bathrooms. We can't live in this house with poop falling from the ceiling.
So just so everyone's clear, you arrive on post, you're in a hotel for a month
Yes.
because no housing is ready.
None. Even though they promised it.
Then you're told housing is ready.
Yes.
You move into the home, and the house starts filling up with water full of feces.
Yes. Pouring from the ceiling.
And the technician you spoke to indicated to you, at least it was your impression based on that conversation, that the company had been aware of the issue with plumbing,
Yes.
but you had not been informed.
I had not been informed. Yes, the words he used, my boss just told me this was a known issue that was not fixed.
And so then you're back into a hotel.
Then we are back into a hotel.
For how long?
So that was a 4-day weekend. We went to stay with family, and they gave us, Balfour set up a hotel for that Monday. So like end of May until June 22nd, which is when we moved into the next house.
So for weeks again.
For weeks.
You're in a hotel.
Yes.
With 2 kids.
With 2
and
kids.
2 dogs.
And 2 dogs with no
Yeah.
space.
Ms. Barnard, from your work with other residents in Balfour Beatty homes nationwide, what can you tell us about how the residents you've worked with view the quality of the work performed by Balfour Beatty's maintenance technicians?
Their feelings echo that has been displayed here today. They want technicians that are trained and skilled to provide the services that are needed to maintain the homes, and that is lacking across all of the homes that I have, all of the families I have worked with. So there's just no consistency in the maintenance techs. Some of them come in with a generalized knowledge of plumbing, but they're not certified plumbers. They contract that out. They come in with a generalized idea of how to put a light bulb in, but they're not electricians. So when we're echoing issues with the build of the home, we're talking about the electrical, the plumbing, the mere safety of the HVAC systems and vents. The technicians aren't HVAC certified, but they're coming out to fix the HVAC systems. Residents want skilled technicians to fix their homes, and if the technicians had the skill set, we wouldn't be in this position we're in right now.
Ms. Barnard, our findings, my staff's findings over the course of the last few months as we've conducted this follow-on investigation, now nearly a year since we held that hearing last year, shows some areas of apparent improvement.
Yes.
There are now more technicians
Yes.
employed by Balfour Beatty
Yes.
at Fort Gordon, according to the company. They indicated to us that some new risk mitigation and quality assurance procedures were in place. I heard from some of the enlisted personnel I met with last week that for work orders that touch on health, life, or safety, they have seen some prompter response times. But we also found severe ongoing issues with the quality
Yes.
of the workmanship, with response times, with communication, and failures to use data
Yes.
to plan for likely maintenance needs. What changes have you seen over the last year in Balfour Beatty's management of homes nationwide?
Over the last year, we have seen positive changes. We have seen them taking actions to address issues at the management level of installations, as far as retaliation from managers. But that's not anything that was in place when these families were going through what they were going through. That's all very recent. As far as their addressing the mold in the homes, is that what you're asking, sir?
Any other changes you've seen in the last year that you want to make the Senate aware of? And you walked through much of this in your opening statement, so you
Yeah.
may be covering, you may be covering territory, but you've already covered, and I
Okay.
think you were very thorough in that opening
Yes.
statement on this. But I'd like to ask each of the residents who are here with us today whether you feel Balfour Beatty took your concerns about mold seriously, took your other concerns about urgent matters that got directly at your family's health seriously, and whether you felt that your urgent requests for timely maintenance work and remediation of these issues were addressed. Ms. Vieira, do you feel that you were treated properly?
Absolutely not. So there are people in place that are supposed to be helping us. And number one, as soon as I spoke out about what was going on, they immediately quit speaking with me. We were not made aware of anything that was going on. And are you asking about like my...
How you felt about how you were treated?
Yeah, it was awful. It felt like I was a nuisance. Like, how dare I be asking for safe, livable housing for my family? We already have a child that has a chronic illness. I don't want her living in these homes, and it's like that does not matter to them at all.
Ms. Porras, how did you feel about how you've been treated?
I felt like I was just a number on their spreadsheet. I was just another work order that they wanted to close out prematurely. They did not take anything seriously. They did not, even when it came to the kids, they did not see us as humans. They just saw us as, oh, well, it's okay. So I did not feel respected or as a human to be living in those homes for how they responded to me, to our family.
Ms. Greer, how did you feel about how you were treated?
I feel that we were not treated well. The staff acts like we bother them just by asking for basic things, and by not even getting the basic things, it makes it even harder to get the major things fixed. We in general, we're not treated well. They're very disrespectful to us, and it comes to a point where you repeatedly ask for things. They kind of make it a point to make you feel like you're bothering me, go away, and then eventually, as time goes on, we will just slowly, we will give up because it's just we know that they're not going to help us.
Well, I want to thank all of you for sharing your experiences with us here today, making the journey and stepping into public, not just on behalf of your families, but on behalf of the service members and spouses and kids who are being subjected to the same treatment in homes all across the country. Continuing to shine a light on this, bringing much-needed transparency and attention to these issues helps to drive change. And I think, Ms. Barnard, while we have seen some change in the last year, what's clear to me is how much further we have to go. I want to reiterate what I said at the beginning of this session, which is that I understand that by speaking out today, our witnesses take on some risk of retaliation for themselves or their family members. And I mentioned a deeply concerning communication at the beginning of this session that I'm aware of. Retaliation will not be tolerated. It will not be tolerated. And if there are any troubling communications, and if you do feel that there is any retaliation for your participation in this U.S. Senate oversight session, then I want to know about it, my staff wants to know about it, because it's completely unacceptable. Thank you again for being with us today, sharing your stories with us today, answering my questions today. Thank you to you, your spouses, your kids, your extended families, your communities for your service and defense of our nation. And we will now take a 10-minute break to set up for our second panel of witnesses. Thank you so much.
Okay, so there you have it, folks. We heard from Senator Ossoff, as well as three people who described their firsthand experience of military housing at Fort Gordon. They just finished up their first session. Now they are going to take about a 10-minute break here before they start up the second session. As you see Senator Ossoff there talking with Brianna Barnhart. She is from the Safe Military Housing Initiative. So she was the fourth person who spoke on this first session of panelists here. So this morning they are going to have two. Right now we're taking about a 10-minute break before we start up with the second session. But let's just kind of talk about what we heard, what we saw in that first session. So this was our first time seeing everybody who was going to be speaking today. We did know Joy Vieira, who you see right there. We have done an I-Team story with her. Meredith Anderson has done an I-Team story with Joy in the past, and so we did know she would be there. I think Meredith had talked about that last night at 6 o'clock on News 12, and so we knew she was going to be here. Heard a little bit from her today, as well as two other women. I did not catch the first woman's name, and I couldn't see her name card, but the third woman was Erin Greer, who, if I heard correctly, is actually a current tenant down at Fort Gordon right now. So, hang on, let's see what's. Sorry, I saw them all looking towards our camera crew's direction. Ah, they're doing a photo. Okay, so didn't catch the first woman's name. She was a former tenant. She's there in the green shirt to Senator Ossoff's left, and then Joy Vieira is to Senator Ossoff's right in the orange shirt. Erin Greer all the way on our far right with the necklace there and the darker blue shirt. And then Brianna Barnhart, who is with Safe Military Housing Initiative, who is kind of an advocate for these families who are going through similar situations to what these three women have described. She is there on our far left. So, well, if you're looking at me, she's on that side. Okay. Anyway, but let's talk a little bit about kind of what we saw, what we heard. So Senator Ossoff opened things up, thanking everybody for coming, and immediately made it known who was not in the room, and that was Balfour Beatty. And that's something that Meredith and I have talked about a couple times over the last week or so. And if you've tuned in here on the News 12 Now desk, if you've seen it on our YouTube channel, on our website, on our streaming app, you'll know that we didn't expect Balfour Beatty to be here. And Meredith calls it deeply, or she called it concerning, troubling, I think was the word she used actually, when she didn't see Balfour Beatty's name on the list. And here's why. If you're not familiar with exactly what's going on here, about 12 years ago, Meredith did a story here on Balfour Beatty, uncovering some of the poor military housing conditions that these these servicemen and women and their families are having to live in. And it took about 10 years for Balfour Beatty to finally sit down with Meredith and talk about it. This was about 2 years ago they did this interview. And at the time, they said they wanted to be more transparent. And they seemed at the time to be taking a step forward, taking a step towards that. What we've seen since has been quite the opposite. And that is shown here today by Balfour Beatty not being in attendance at this session. So Senator Ossoff hit on that early, and he hit on that kind of hard too. Another thing he said, that this was new. We knew about the Balfour Beatty stuff. They weren't going to show up. This part is new. He said one of the women who spoke today was actually called by her military installation. He didn't specify which woman or who called or whatever, but they basically asked if the woman would be talking about them. Short answer, yeah. So Senator Ossoff called that troubling and something they were going to keep an eye on, because as he hit on later, he said retaliation will not be tolerated. So if there is any retaliation for these women coming forward today and speaking out today against what they've gone through at Fort Gordon, if there's any retaliation for that, that will cause a bigger problem for whoever does retaliate. So that's how Senator Ossoff opened things up. Then he turned it over to the three women to share their stories about their experience living in homes run by Balfour Beatty. As you see Gary there. All right, Gary. So again, did not catch the first woman's name, unfortunately. But they all shared their stories a little bit, and while the stories are all different, they all share some similarities, and that is broken promises, a lack of trust and a lack of transparency, and a feeling of just unimportance. Kind of like they were just cast aside. As one of the women put it, she felt like she was another work order on a spreadsheet that they wanted to close out prematurely. So that one hit home a little bit. We heard from Joy Vera, who again we have interviewed here for an I-Team story, and she said, I wrote down brief quotes, but she's basically said, how can they, soldiers fighting overseas, defending our country, focus on their mission when they're unsure if their families have a safe living environment? And that's something they got into a little bit more after the opening statement. Senator Ossoff kind of wanted her to elaborate on that a little bit, because she had talked about morale of the soldiers going down. And basically, think about it. If you're away for 6, 8, 12 months and you don't know if your kids are breathing clean air in your house back home, it makes it tough to focus on what you're doing thousands of miles away. So that was one of the points they made. Ms. Greer, she has been at Fort Gordon for 7 years, dating back to 2016. She had a number of things. Let me take a look through my notes here. So the one thing, or one of the things that really stuck out to me about this whole thing is in talking with Meredith and in seeing these stories in the past couple years, I have an idea of how bad it is, but listening to it today, listening to these women talk today, I didn't know how bad it was. And that brings me to Erin Greer here, who said she and her family had chronic fatigue, body aches, nosebleeds, headaches, memory loss. 2 of their dogs died, and they think that their lives were cut short because of the toxic indoor environment that they were subjected to. She went on to say they tried to stay out of the house as much as possible. They tried to stay out of the house as much as possible. She said they were sleeping on the front porch, as you see here, a name card there for Balfour Beatty, who will not be showing up. So they will be represented by an empty chair today. Okay, but let me go back here. So she said they tried to stay out of the house as much as they could. She said they stayed on the front porch, they stayed on the back porch. There were a couple nights they stayed in their cars. She said her husband talked about putting a blow-up mattress in the bed of his truck because they just did not want to be inside the house. They didn't feel safe inside the house. They felt like they were going to get sick if they were inside that house any longer than they had to. So she said they avoided going into the house unless they absolutely had to. She said Balfour Beatty continued to tell her that they had to wait until Balfour Beatty brought in their own inspector before they could be temporarily put somewhere else. So if they wanted to stay out of the house during that time before Balfour Beatty could bring in the inspector, it was on them to find and pay for a place to stay. And I don't remember her family situation, how many kids she has, but Joy Vera has, I believe, 2 kids, and then the first woman, who, again, I apologize, I did not catch her name, she had 4 kids, and she actually did live somewhere else for a time, and it was 4 kids living in a 1-room hotel. with her. Not suitable. Then we heard from Brianna Barnhart again, who's with the Safe Housing or Safe Military Housing Initiative. And let me just look through here. She basically said they want to see three things happen to kind of come up with a solution here. One was they wanted on-base military housing to be held to the national standards for safe living. Reasonable. Two, she didn't, and this one I found interesting, and not something I would have thought of, but she said no closing out work tickets without a resident's signature. So one of the things that these three women were talking about was they felt like Balfour Beatty was just closing out work tickets and without really doing the work to fix the problem, and just closing it out and kind of filing it away and being done with it. So in this plan, in this part of the plan, they would not be able to close out work tickets without a resident's signature. So until the residents felt like their problems were addressed, the situations were resolved, and they signed off on it, until they did that, Balfour Beatty couldn't close out the signature. Then the third one was for-profit military housing contractors, Balfour Beatty, and the Department of Defense must work together to fix defects before residents complain. Because in some of these cases, we heard that they knew there were issues before these people, these families moved in. So I'll go back to Joy Vera, who was sitting on the left side of this table you're looking at right now. She said that she moved here in April, and for a month she had to stay in a hotel room because no housing was ready, even though she was promised and her family was promised that housing would be ready. So she had to stay in a hotel room. When she was finally able to move in May of last year, there was sewage backed up in the bathtub, and she said pouring out of the ceiling. So what was the and so she had a meeting with someone about that, and they said that they were aware of that problem before they moved in. How's that allowed to happen? It's a good question. That's one of the reasons we're here. So after they went through their statements and kind of gave some details about what they've been living through, Senator Ossoff did ask a few questions, and I do have to commend the senator, and this is something Meredith and I have talked about as well. He's really been, excuse me, I'm just trying to find some more notes here real quick. But Senator Ossoff is really being diligent with this whole thing, and making sure that he's seeing it through all the way. We were up here a year ago for when they talked about their findings and their investigation that they launched, and now we're back here a year later. He was just here last week when inspections started on the housing units at Fort Gordon, and that's something we could talk about too while we're waiting for the next panel to come in. But Senator Ossoff has really seen this thing through, and he said they have seen some change, but they still have a long way to go. And that long way to go is inspecting every single unit down there at Fort Gordon. So they are going through 1,700 units at Fort Gordon. They estimated it to be about 4.5 weeks. Could be more, could be less, depends on how long it takes to search each unit. I'm sure some units they're going to find no issues with. Some units, from what we've seen, they're going to find a lot of issues with. So they're going to go through all 1,700 units there at Fort Gordon and give a whole summary of what they find. So that is big, because basically all we've gotten so far is just what the few brave families who have stood up and spoken out have told us. And we've seen pictures and we've seen videos, and we've showed you those pictures and those videos. But right now we are going to get a detailed sample of data that shows just how bad the housing conditions are. Because I don't think we truly realize the scope of it. Because Meredith will tell you, for every family that has spoken to her in the last 12 years, there have been a number of families who are scared to speak out because of retaliation, and we kind of saw that in the first 2 minutes of what Senator Ossoff was talking about today. Saw that fear of retaliation. So they're going through every unit, inspecting it, and going to give a detailed report over what they find. So that's what we can expect over the next 4.5 weeks. Don't know when that report is going to come out. I'm sure it's going to take a little while to put all of that data together, but that is what we are working towards now. So the next group that is going to be coming in here, we have Rachel Jacobson, who is the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Installations, Energy, and Environment, and then Lieutenant General Kevin Vereen, Deputy Chief of Staff of the Army, G9. So those are two pretty high-ranking people who are going to be sitting down, and that's really what this whole meeting is about. It's about sitting down with high-ranking members of the Army, the senator, and these families who are affected, the major players in this. We can call it a crisis, I think, because what these people are living through is a crisis. Just making sure I don't miss anything here, but it's troubling to see that the group that can really fix this problem is represented by a name card and an empty chair. Balfour Beatty has talked about how they want to be transparent, how they want to work to get this done, and Meredith sat down with Balfour Beatty and with the garrison commander at the time of the Army, of Fort Gordon, sat down with them, and she said it sounded like they really wanted to work to get through this. And here we are 2 years later, and we've got the Army, we've got the families, we've got Washington, we don't have Balfour Beatty. The message that sends to the families involved in this is not very good, and I think they'll tell you that. Certainly the ones here, I think, will tell you that. And so we'll have to see what response they have to all of this, because, you know, they can watch this. This is on Facebook and Twitter, and we've got it here on YouTube right now, and this will be up on our website. It is on our website, actually. So, you know, they have the ability to watch this. I don't know if they are, but anywho. Okay. What else is happening here? If you missed any of what Meredith and I had talked about, we do have that up on our YouTube channel, up on our streaming app and website. So if you want to check that out, if you want to get all caught up with what's going on, you can check all that out up on there. And then, yeah, all of Meredith's stories going back 10, 12 years are up there as well. So we've got all the information that you need. It is a lot, but this is a lot. And I think Meredith has said it well over the last week that she and I have done these live little interviews. I think everybody should care about this because this is our military. These are the men and women who serve our country and their families, and they're living in conditions that, you know, if it was an apartment that I was looking at, I wouldn't live there. I would recommend that none of my friends and family live there, and yet we're subjecting the people who are serving our country to live there. And that is something that they talked about today as well. Brianna Barnhart, again, Safe Military Housing Initiative, said these soldiers don't want to re-enlist. We have a problem keeping good soldiers because of these housing conditions. And Senator Ossoff talked about troubles with recruiting right now. We're recruiting at low numbers for the military. And so if we're recruiting at low numbers and we're retaining at low numbers, we're not going to have the numbers we need. Let me go back a little bit, because I talked about we don't quite know the scope of this. Because, again, we only know the families who have come forward and talked to us or have gone to Washington and talked at the Senate hearing last year and then at this session today. But we don't know about all the families on Fort Gordon, and furthermore, we don't know about all the families across the country. Balfour Beatty is in charge of 50 military installations across the country. Fort Gordon is just step one in a long process of inspections and investigations into Balfour Beatty's housing. So again, this may be something that takes years before we truly realize how big it is. But this is a good step. This is a step that if you ask many people who are affected by this, this is a step that's many years in the making. I don't want to say too late, because it's always better late than never, but it is very late, and it's good to see it, finally being taken. Okay, let's we'll take a peek back in real quick, and then I'll jump back on here in a minute as we get this second session started. But for right now, we'll take a quick break. I'll let you kind of look in, and then we'll get going here in a couple minutes. Okay, folks, if you are just joining us here, or you have been here but aren't sure what's going on, we are taking a live look here. Excuse me. Taking a live look here at Washington, D.C., where we are live at a session, an oversight session between Senator Jon Ossoff, some military families who are living or have lived on Fort Gordon, as well as some higher-ranking members of the Army. And I'm actually going to pull up their names and titles real quick so we know exactly who we are talking to here, or hearing from, rather. Let's see. Okay, we've got Rachel Jacobson, who is the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Installations, Energy, and Environment, and then Lieutenant General Kevin Vereen, who's the Deputy Chief of Staff of the Army, G9. So that's who we're going to be hearing from in this next session. That may be Lieutenant General Vereen there. I was trying to read his little name card. That would be my guess, just based on the brief interaction he's having with the senator. So it looks like we're about to go ahead and get started. So we'll pop back in here, and then we'll kind of go over everything that's happened and that we've learned from this session. So we'll jump back in.
We will begin again now, turning to our second panel from the U.S. Army. This is an opportunity to hear what measures the Army is undertaking to improve oversight of privatized military housing and to ensure the Army is in a position to hold Balfour Beatty and other companies accountable when they fall short of expectations and responsibilities. I want to thank our two distinguished witnesses today, the Honorable Rachel Jacobson and Lieutenant General Kevin Vereen. The Honorable Rachel Jacobson is the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Installations, Energy, and Environment. In this role, she is the primary advisor to the Secretary of the Army and Chief of Staff of the Army for all matters related to Army installation policy and oversight and coordination of energy security and management. In addition, she is responsible for policy and oversight of sustainability and environmental initiatives, resource management, including design, military construction, operations, and maintenance. Lieutenant General Vereen is the Deputy Chief of Staff, G9. In this role, he leads integration across the Army to modernize installations, enhance quality of life, and develop and implement policies, plans, and programs that enable the U.S. Army to recruit, train, deploy, fight, and win. His military career began in 1988 in field artillery. In 1990, he transitioned to the military police. During his over 30-year career as a military police officer, Lieutenant General Vereen has held notable assignments and leadership roles worldwide, including Commandant of the Military Police Regiment, the Army's Provost Marshal General, and the Commanding General of U.S. Army Criminal Investigation Command. Secretary Jacobson will now begin with your statement, please.
Thank you, Senator Ossoff, for the opportunity for us to discuss the critical subject of housing at Fort Gordon and the Army's continual efforts to improve quality of life for our soldiers and their families. Your leadership, as well as the involvement of Congress, has been crucial to addressing the challenges faced by the military housing privatization initiative in the last few years. We are especially grateful that you have joined, that you've invited Army representatives, and you joined the Army representatives, I should say, including Lieutenant General Vereen at Fort Gordon last week to observe ongoing comprehensive housing inspection that we're doing there. Oh, okay. Sorry about that. As you mentioned, we're welcome the opportunity to share the progress we're making to achieve our mutual goals. We have reviewed the recent report from your office that follows up on the original investigation into housing at Fort Gordon that you conducted in April of 2022, and the Army's own investigation and forensic analysis following your investigation. You prompted that, so thank you. And we're glad that we conducted that follow-up investigation internally as well. I want to start by saying I'm very, very sorry for the hardship these families have endured. What you've described today and what you experienced is unacceptable. And we at Army, at every level, are committed to remedying this situation, and retaliation is never acceptable, ever. For us, the foundational document, if you will, contract with Balfour Beatty and all of the privatized housing companies is the ground lease. And the ground lease is the key tool for oversight and enforcement of the private housing providers. The ground lease is the first document. It's by giving the providers a lease on Army lands, that's the foundational document that controls everything. And to first what we've done fundamentally to enhance the effectiveness of our legal documents, we developed revised ground lease language that specifically outlines the consequences of noncompliance by the private housing companies that could lead to default and potential termination if deficiencies are not cured. The new language reinforces the premise that project companies are expected to have complete awareness of their legal mandate to comply with all ground lease and property management agreements for properly maintaining the homes, and they must immediately correct any instances of noncompliance. And the basic premise is safety and inhabitability. Very basic. So if that's not met, that's noncompliance. I utilized this legal enforcement tool on July 12, 2022, when I issued Balfour Beatty a notice of noncompliance with the terms of the Fort Gordon ground lease, informing them that they were in jeopardy of default. Further, in response to the findings of our respective investigations, we demanded the development and implementation of comprehensive quality assurance and quality control plan. In response, Balfour Beatty complied, and they briefed the details of their new plan to me, to my staff, and the then commanding general of the Army Material Command, and that briefing was held on the Pentagon in December 9th of 2022. That plan, that quality assurance, quality control plan, addresses processes for maintenance and work orders, including those for life, health, or safety concerns. The Army holds Balfour Beatty accountable for adherence to this plan with a rigorous program of oversight. Trained Army Housing Office personnel at the garrison conduct quality assurance inspections of all between occupancy maintenance work performed by Balfour Beatty staff. This means that every time a tenant moves out of a home, trained Army personnel will personally inspect, or they should, personally inspect the work done by Balfour Beatty to prepare that home for its next occupant. This is not a formality because the inspections frequently result in the need for additional work before the home is approved for a new tenant. And the result should be that there's a better home waiting for the soldier when they move in. Additionally, the Army has a policy that trained Army Housing Office personnel will conduct follow-up inspections of all work order maintenances pertaining to life, health, or safety concerns to ensure resolution of these issues whenever they arise. Okay, yes, thank you. Also, our Army Housing Office staff conduct random quality assurance inspections at 5% randomly of all maintenance orders, whether or not they concern life, health, or safety. And to further augment the Army's expertise in monitoring the private housing provider, the Installation Management Command is adding 23 engineering technicians across the portfolio that will work with the installation housing offices. These engineers will also monitor construction activity when new homes are built to make sure they adhere to Army standards. Another way we are enhancing oversight is through regular meetings between Army and Balfour Beatty leadership at all levels. Each week, the commanding general of the Installation Management Command holds a weekly housing review with representatives of the Garrison Housing Office, the IMCOM staff, and the private housing provider. And actually, General Vereen and I sat in the one yesterday related to Balfour Beatty by video. Army and what happens during that session is the Army garrison and the private housing provider review several critical issues related to any kind of issues going on at the installation, related to status of displaced residents, any dispute resolutions, and their work and their weekly scorecards. And the scorecards, which we brought some with us, they're kind of big. They track and monitor the status of life, health, and safety workers, emergency maintenance inspections, among other items. In General of Income or the Army Materiel Command holds a CEO roundtable discussion with all high-level leadership of the private housing companies, including Balfour Beatty. In addition to the meetings at that level, the Army maintains regular points of contact with Balfour Beatty at the installation and headquarters levels. Communication between the Army Housing Office and Balfour Beatty staff at Fort Gordon takes place at least on a weekly basis. In addition, headquarters of the Department of the Army also holds meetings every 2 weeks in which staff from headquarters, AMC, IMCOM, can ask Balfour Beatty direct questions about what they're doing to fulfill their obligations. Significantly, and perhaps most importantly, there are regular town halls conducted at the installation where residents can speak up, including with Army leadership there, to discuss what can be done to address issues they're having. BBC will be present as well as garrison leadership, so it is encouraged that those town halls be attended. As we carry out these initiatives, we're also still implementing the remaining elements of congressional mandates in the 2020 NDAA privatization reform. As of now, all of Army's privatized housing providers have accepted to implementation of the 18 Bill of Rights, and we're seeing results. We also introduced a dispute resolution process, which we also encourage residents to use, and we've resolved 43 of the 47 disputes that were initiated through that process, with only 4 cases that had to move on to the next level. Implementation of the dispute resolution process is really important to restore, hopefully, our residents' faith in the Army's oversight of the privatized housing program. It should give residents a secure basis for negotiation with the private housing provider. And it will also reiterate Army's role as an advocate for the residents at all times. We are also mindful that congressional involvement is crucial to addressing the needs of Fort Gordon in particular. The primary mission of Fort Gordon has changed significantly since the private project was established there, the private housing project. With the addition of the Cyber Center of Excellence, Fort Gordon has experienced a significant change in housing requirements with additional needs, and the Army has been working diligently to meet the funding requirements necessary to address these added housing requirements. An initial step is the inclusion in our budget request for fiscal year 24 of $50 million to support recapitalization of the Fort Gordon housing inventory. This will go to housing at Fort Gordon. It doesn't go to Balfour Beatty's pockets. This is to build new homes at Fort Gordon. And this much-needed investment will fund construction of up to 100 new townhomes and will have a major impact on the quality of life of soldiers stationed there. We've also recently approved the use of over $5 million in funds from the reinvestment account for revitalization of homes at the installation. This will enable maintenance needs in approximately 118 homes on base. Finally, as you had the opportunity to observe last week, we're moving ahead with the comprehensive home inspections at Fort Gordon, of which you were an important advocate. The knowledge gained from these inspections in conjunction with our previous assessments will be invaluable to inform future investments, as the data we collect on every unit will allow us to maximize effective use of available funding. I think I can say on behalf of all of us that there remains much to be done, but we are encouraged by the progress we are making. The quality of housing of our soldiers and their families is a fundamental element of the Army's priority of putting people first. By upholding our shared pledge to take care of places where soldiers live, we're directly contributing to Army's readiness and its ability to fight and win on the battlefield. We will not let up on our oversight and these enforcement activities. We are committed to improving conditions kinds of conditions we heard about today. As Ms. Barnard said, we have to get it right and we have to do better. Thank you for your continued support, Senator.
Thank you, Secretary Jacobson and General Vereen.
So first of all, Senator, thank you for allowing us to come speak today. It's on green, so. Testing. Okay. All right. Great. Okay. All right. So, Senator, thank you for allowing us to come speak today. And first of all, I do want to say thank you for your commitment to our families and our soldiers and Department of Army civilians. It was a pleasure to meet you down at Fort Gordon last week, and I surely appreciated the visit. I also want to say thanks to the families for coming up and speaking and using their voice to talk about some of the challenges that they're experiencing. And their voice does matter. It was really insightful for us to listen to the testimonies today. And so as we've read the reports and as we've kind of taken in the information, it's reality sets in when you hear personal testimony. So we appreciate the opportunity to be able to listen to our families. As Honorable Jacobson said before, we are truly committed to ensuring that we have safe housing for our families and ensuring that safety and health truly matters for our Army. And we are focused on the conditions at Fort Gordon as well as our installations across the Army. Our families and our soldiers truly deserve quality housing. They deserve it, and we are going to ensure that we provide it for them. Our Army is about people, and our Army is built around people. It is our job to uphold the obligation to our Army families that we will have quality housing wherever they reside, to include where they live, work, and play, and that is important. I can't say enough about it being about readiness, because it truly is. The multiple examples that were painted here today about the impacts of not having quality housing and the time it consumes and taking our soldiers away from their daily duties as they prepare for things that may not be expected to perform with regards to missions across the globe. It impacts our families and it impacts our soldiers, and it does impact readiness, and so we don't take it lightly. I do look forward to the discussion today, and again, I want to thank you for allowing us to come, and I want to thank the families for speaking and using their voice as they have presented today. Thank you.
Well, Secretary Jacobson and General Vereen, thank you both for your statements. I appreciate the Army's continued willingness to engage with me and my office. General, it was great to see you at Fort Gordon last week. Secretary Jacobson, we met shortly after the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations released its findings last year, and you've both remained accessible and available and responsive to my office, and I appreciate that. And I think that we're all here today because we share the same objectives. We want to ensure that our soldiers, their spouses, and their kids are living in safe and healthy homes. We want them to be living in safe and healthy homes because it's the right thing to do for them, and as you just pointed out, General, it's the right thing to do for the nation. We heard, I think, very eloquently from our first panel of witnesses the real impact this has on the mindset, morale, daily life of soldiers and their families, as well as the obvious impact on the Army's capacity to retain talented young people at a moment when you face serious recruiting challenges. I also want to note, Secretary Jacobson and General, that immediately after I released the findings with Senator Johnson of our bipartisan investigation, you began taking action. You suspended the payment of incentive fees. You launched an Army investigation. You commissioned an independent forensic investigation. You agreed at my request to make Fort Gordon the first installation in the nation to undergo comprehensive home-by-home quality inspections. And I had, as you mentioned, General, the opportunity to observe the beginning of that last week. All of that is noted and appreciated. To me, it demonstrates your commitment to getting this right, as difficult as it is to make progress on a complex problem like this one. Before we begin with the questions, I want to reiterate that while Balfour Beatty has responded to my staff's request for documents and has met with them privately at our request, we extended an invitation to them to participate in today's session, to give them the opportunity to discuss in public the changes they've made since the hearing that we held last year, the investigation that I led last year, where they made very specific commitments. And I think it's important that these conversations happen in public. But their unwillingness to participate today, I think, damages their claims of increased transparency and accessibility for the Senate, where I and my colleagues represent the families that they house. And so we would have welcomed Balfour Beatty's participation today. We had these seats prepared for them, and we remain ready to engage with them in a public setting and encourage them to have the courage to do so and to speak to the progress that they are attempting to make. Let's just very briefly again touch on why this matters. General, you mentioned that it was powerful for you to hear the firsthand testimonies from the families who were represented here today. Why is that important for you, and can you speak to the morale and retention issues we've discussed based upon your experience as an officer?
Yes, Senator, great question. So as an Army, we have a primary mission, and we all sign up and we take the oath of office, to defend, our nation. And we understand in some cases that requires us to train and be ready to deploy and, and to call. And so with that said, it's important to know that, in all the things that we do, the obligations to do that, we're balancing both being ready, but we're also balancing families. And I have a family too. And so it's important when we are engaged in the daily duties of Army training and the requirements that the Army demands on units and leaders and our soldiers, it's important that our families are able to not have to worry about the problems that would normally take us away from that focus. And when it does, whether it's time, whether it's it's other requirements that really don't allow you to focus on preparing for your normal mission, then your unit can't be ready, and that soldier can't be ready. So a reciprocal impact on our ability to be able to do our mission.
Time, money, or health, right?
Right, absolutely.
I mean,
absolutely.
I got a 16-month-old baby daughter at home, and I think all the parents who are with us today are tuned in across the country know that your perspective on the conditions of one's home really changes when you got a baby.
Right.
Mold, fungus, contamination, pests, when it's impacting the health of our soldiers' young children, it's wrong, and the impact on morale is huge. General, just what was the impact as you listened to the testimony today on you personally?
Well, I to be honest with you, I thought about when I was a young officer and I had young kids and staying in Army housing and with the family, and so I think back then our systems were a little bit different. When I first came in, we didn't have the privatized housing company. It gradually came into being after a few years of being in the military, but But I just remember having young children and living in Army housing, and the expectation is that I'm expecting the house that I reside in to be fit for folks to live in, just like I would expect it to be today. And so I just reflected back on being a young officer, and hopefully having the opportunity, if there were problems, to be able to speak about them and speak openly and freely, and getting problems resolved fairly immediately. And so that I just reflected back on my first years in the military with a young family and children living in Army housing.
Thank you, General. Secretary Jacobson, extensive discussion of mold during the first panel, extensive discussion of mold in the Army's investigation, in the forensic investigation, in the PSI investigation I released last year. What formal directives or guidance has the Army disseminated so that Balfour Beatty and other private housing companies adopt a consistent and uniform approach to addressing these concerns about mold remediation?
Mold is a chronic condition. It is. And we have to get at it not only in these houses, but in barracks and other facilities. It's a real serious problem. And Army has issued a couple of documents that pertain specifically to addressing mold, and they're very detailed technical documents. We also have an industrial hygiene, public health, Army mold remediation guidance that was issued. It's a technical guidance that was issued in February 2019 through the U.S. Army Public Health Center. And we also have a follow-up industrial hygiene mold assessment guidance that was issued in October 2018. We have trained personnel, inspectors at the Army housing offices that are supposed to be able to recognize mold. We disseminated just last year what they call an executive order for each garrison commander to inspect mold at all facilities with instructions on mold remediation using EPA-approved protocols. So we're bringing the best expertise to bear in terms of the direction, in terms of the training, and in terms of the inspection. But we're obviously not doing enough, and particularly where we have housing providers that are the first order of responsibility to address mold in those houses, we obviously need to do more. And we will continue to do so. I know General Vereen has also been having conversations with IMCOM, which oversees very directly the mold remediation efforts by the housing providers. You might want to add.
Yes, so Senator, I think that what Honorable Jacobson has described really kind of gives, I think, the framework of how we've really provided awareness and using the technical guides to kind of help us as we look at remediation. I think the other piece that's important, two things, is that first of all, we have to have trained experts when it comes to our installations, and we know that in some of the previous findings didn't necessarily have the expertise at the installation level, and so I think we've done a lot to hire those folks, and even training at the folks that are already assigned to our installations on how to look and how to remediate issues when it comes to mold. I think so. I think we're turning the corner again, as Honorable Jacobs has said. We're not where we need to be, but I think we've made some vast improvement, at least at the ground level, at the installation level. And so I think the second piece is, it's all about awareness as well. Our residents should receive, a packet should be talked about in their as they receive their homes, their new homes, and sign for them about mold remediation and all the steps they need to do in order to ensure that they have a safe, healthy, home to live in. I think we've done a really good job of at least solidifying packets and ensuring that those are present when our residents sign for their homes. I think that's important as well, so that they can at least understand the first signs of mold and kind of what to do next, what are the steps to do beyond just recognition of the mold.
General, it's a problem, isn't it, that families are resorting to bringing in independent inspectors who are then deeming their homes unfit for occupancy after the housing operator has insisted they remain in the homes. It's a big problem, isn't it?
It is a problem. I read the report. I understand the few incidents where that was, that did happen. And I think we owe our families better than that. I mean, if we're providing a service holistically, meaning that, we're providing the house and we're providing all the things to take care and maintain the house, then it shouldn't be at the expenses of families to be able to have to seek outside expertise to be able to validate whether something is wrong or not. I mean, we should have the internal capacity to be able to do that. So it is not a good story.
Secretary Jacobson, you sent a letter to Balfour Beatty in July of last year, which you mentioned in your opening comments, warning them that they may be non-compliant with their ground lease, demanding a full explanation of how Balfour Beatty conducts quality control of its maintenance operations at Fort Gordon. That followed the work that I'd done. It also followed a very worrying gas leak on post in June of 2022. And this issue of quality workmanship and the quality of maintenance work is central. Our most recent report finds this is an ongoing deficiency, the technical quality of maintenance work. First, Secretary Jacobson, please could you just characterize again that document you sent to Balfour Beatty in July of last year and talk about what's happened since in response.
Thank you, Senator. I've corresponded with Balfour Beatty several times.
In which you warned them they may be non-compliant in terms of their ground lease.
I think that one was following the improper installation of a gas water heater where a woman had to be hospitalized because of the fumes resulting from the improper installation. And in that instance, I said to them, you are now in non-compliance with your ground lease, and this could end up in default and termination. And that we wanted an immediate, I think I gave them 14 days to respond about what they were going to do about this. And in response, they came back with a specific QA/QC for the installation of gas-powered equipment, utilities. And I know they fired the gentleman who was the tech maintenance person there. They said that they were going to improve their installation of anything that required a gas hookup. They were also, we said we're going to do 100% inspection of any of those kinds of maintenance orders, and they followed up accordingly. I also sent them, so that was, they then briefed us with the Quality Control Assurance Plan for gas venting repairs and replacement. That seemed satisfactory if they were going to implement all of it. And plus, Army would then do 100% follow-up inspection of those gas venting repairs and replacement work orders. I also sent them a letter after our respective investigations, more generally, saying, you've got chronic problems here, and I want you to come back here and brief us about what broader QA/QC programs you're going to put in effect. In addition,
and that acronym for the public.
quality assurance, quality control.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, just step back one. So this broader letter, just if you can begin again,
right.
Describe to the public what it was, what it contained, and what's happened since.
So the broader letter, as I said, there's so many letters that I've written to them. I wrote them a letter saying, that was improper installation of the water heater, was 18 October 2022. And my letter to them, then we wrote a letter to them on 31 October. No, I'm sorry, from BBC and Arnold Jacobson. Here it is. okay, July, I wrote to them on, the 27th of April, and I said, "This deep concerns regarding this findings in the Senate report from April 16th." So, I mean, I wrote to them, you issued your report on April 26th. I wrote to them on April 27th. And I said, "I'm deeply concerned about that. And they're very disturbing in light of BBC's recent fraud conviction. And that I'm directing the Commanding General of Army Material Command to commence an immediate investigation. And that we were going to go through with a forensic analysis." That was that letter. Then I wrote to them on 12 July, and that might be the one you're thinking of. And I said that I said, based on this noncompliance, oh, that was the gas leak one. I apologize. That was a gas leak letter.
Let's just,
I wrote to,
Secretary,
anyway.
I didn't mean to
Yeah.
mire you in the binder there. I think the point
Right.
I'm trying to make sure we capture here
Yes,
is that you have communicated to Balfour Beatty that at times, in your view, either they are or they are at risk of noncompliance with the terms of the ground lease. And I just want to make sure that everybody knows
That's right.
what this means. Balfour Beatty's ground lease with the Army sets the obligations that the company has to meet. It's part of the bargain, right?
that is part of the bargain. That is exactly right. That's the contract.
Right. And they have to keep the homes in Fort Gordon in good order and repair and in a decent, safe, and sanitary condition, correct?
Correct.
That's their part of the bargain.
That is.
And if that is the case, if a company that has those obligations is consistently found to be non-compliant or in breach of these obligations, then at some point, the Army, as you threatened in some of this correspondence,
Right.
could terminate its lease agreement with Balfour Beatty, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So let's talk about how we measure progress. And again, I want to thank you for the steps you've taken, timely and vigorously, since last April. I think it's important, in general, you and I discussed this last week, that we set some goals. Do you agree, General?
Yes, Senator.
So we talked about the importance of metrics last week. It's important to identify specific metrics and targets that have to be met within a given time period, whether that's 6 months or a year or 18 months, and hold both the Army and housing companies accountable to that. So, General, what are the metrics that you believe are most important for us to identify and specify for Balfour Beatty to ensure it is making good on its obligations, and Secretary, weigh in as you see fit?
Yeah. So, Senator, we did discuss, it's really about the metrics and holding, Balfour Beatty accountable in achieving certain requirements through metrics and data. I think if I had to, kind of frame, what we're looking at, potentially it's sort of three parts right now. It's really the operational side. And so what does that entail? Well, it's just the daily operations of requirements that Balfour Beatty must achieve when it comes to, their between occupancy levels of time. How long does it take for them to turn, homes, customer service, how many, complaints based on, a period of time over a certain period of time that they've received that are not in good favor. And then what were the basis of those complaints to get at the specifics. I think the other pieces to that is, how long does it take for them to complete work orders, and the number of, service techs that have to frequent one work order in order to close it out to make sure that it was closed out appropriately. So that's the operational side. I think we need to really solidify matrix that allow certain things to be done at the operational level. And then we have, the short-term requirements when it comes to the viability of, of their operation, of their company. What are the immediate, when I look at it, what are the immediate sort of minor construction requirements, whether it's remodeling and and getting after existing infrastructure that needs to be remodeled, and how quick are they turning those around? And then, what's their debt level with regards to how much they're spending to do that? And then I think the long-term piece is their long-term, viability, which gets after, major MILCON. What are the projected or the prospective, new developments that they're building, and then how are we holding them? What's their timeline from the time that they have designs done to the time that they're breaking ground to the time that they're actually delivering, a home to a resident? I mean, I think so. So when I look at, it in totality, it's operational, and then it's the viability, both, short term and long term. That's kind of how the metrics need to be created. Now we've engaged Balfour Beatty, and we've kind of, really laid that out to them just sort of verbally. But they owe us in June sort of their plan when it comes to, the metrics and understanding how we're gonna actually achieve those. Now, there's a lot of space between what we do at headquarters DA and what happens there on the ground at Fort Gordon. There's the interface with the garrison. Of course, the garrison has some requirements that have to be done. So, accounting at echelon, the metrics that need to be accounted for, both at the garrison level, at the installation management command level, and then at the Army Materiel Command level, and then monitored and tracked at the headquarters DA level.
Thank you, General Secretary. Anything you want to add in terms of metrics?
The metrics are many, I would say. Just yesterday, when we sat in on this weekly housing review scorecard, it's essentially a set of metrics. What's their average time for emergency orders, urgent orders, routine orders? What's the wait list of time for tenants to get into the homes? What's the between occupancy maintenance time? How many homes are offline? How many maintenance occupancy inspections are completed? Dispute resolution and so forth. So there are these constant metrics of sort of day-to-day metrics that are collected all the time. Then the bigger picture metrics. Do they have a good quality assurance program? How are they implementing it? What are they doing to address understaffing, which was a chronic condition, I think, that caused a lot of these problems? Lack of maintenance training. Do they have trained personnel? Quality control, again, essential. And our understanding is based on the quality control, quality assurance plan that they presented us. They're now working with their association to combine forces with the other housing providers to come up with the best practice QA/QC program, which of course then would be reviewed by Army for approval. But that's a good thing. That's progress. And especially communication, because as we heard from the residents today, there are serious communication problems, either because residents are ignored or they don't feel like they have a venue for communicating. So I'd say part of the metrics has to be what avenues do you have for communication, and how is that communication being addressed when tenants raise complaints? And that's why I can't stress enough the importance of tenants going to the Army Housing Office, filing complaints, using the dispute resolution process, because metrics also give us foundational data if we want to take further action. So without those kinds of records emanating from residents themselves, we hear stories like this today, but if we don't have those records, it's harder for us to implement formal action under the ground lease.
So, General and Secretary, there are three more topics I want to make sure we cover, just to make sure you have situational awareness here. I want to talk a little bit about the findings of the Army's reports last year. I want to briefly touch upon the progress that has been made since then. And I want to talk about the construction at Fort Gordon. Okay, so let's just begin. Secretary Jacobson, again, after the PSI report, you commissioned a third-party assessment to analyze Balfour Beatty's performance. The third-party assessment found that for the time period of their review, Balfour Beatty lacked robust quality control of the work performed, correct?
Correct.
And also that Balfour Beatty had too few maintenance personnel on staff to conduct necessary maintenance, right?
Correct.
Then an Army Regulation 15-6 investigation was conducted by Brigadier General Lowry, assessing the performance of the Army and Balfour Beatty in managing and overseeing housing on Fort Gordon, again, all following last year's Senate report. The Army report found that the Army and Balfour Beatty are not making full use of the data available to them to anticipate and conduct repairs, correct?
Correct. Correct.
And also found opportunities for improvement of the performance of the Army Housing Office at Fort Gordon, for example, finding that it was only conducting queries on closed work orders, and noting, this is the Army 15-6 report, that the Army Housing Office has had no role in unresolved urgent work orders. Again, this is retrospective. This is the investigations that you, to your credit, commissioned and ordered after the Senate report, making sure we're getting some of the key findings. All that consistent with your understanding, yes?
Yes.
Okay. So let's talk about the progress that's been made. And let's try to just take a step back. And Secretary Jacobson, share with me where you think things stand, what progress has been made since last April, and where do we go from here? And then we're going to talk about construction.
I'd say that I'll talk about for Army, the progress for Army. Awareness. Our awareness now is, I believe, much greater than it was a year ago. I think because of all these issues that came to light, because of our own internal investigations, it was a wake-up call. And now, literally at echelon, I spent a lot of time on this. General Vereen spends a lot of time on this. My housing office within the Secretariat spends time on this. The Army Materiel Command Commanding General spends time on this, General Daly, and now it will be General Hamilton. General Daly has retired. General Jones spends a huge amount of time on this. He's the Commanding General for Installation Management Command. By holding these weekly meetings, then at the garrison level, the garrison commander is much more involved than they were before. And our direction to the Army Housing Office that for accountability, for responsibility, we've hired tens and dozens of new professionals for our housing offices across the United States, because obviously problems that came to light, we want to make sure we're addressing them everywhere. So I'd say the biggest improvement for Army that will continue is our awareness. And that will inform our investment decisions going forward, but will also inform our ability to conduct better oversight, and especially when we have records to demonstrate continuing chronic problems so we can take action.
Thank you, Secretary Jacobson. And let's discuss construction,
Okay.
recapitalization. And General, you and I talked about this yesterday. In fact, we drove together past the area that is allotted for new construction on post at Fort Gordon. So first of all, Secretary Jacobson, in recent communication with my office, Army officials mentioned, quote, the Army has recently approved the use of $5.1 million in funds from the Fort Gordon reinvestment account for revitalization work at the installation. And I was informed last week on post that the Army has also approved over $12 million for Balfour Beatty to use for new construction. You mentioned, and I believe that this demonstrates the Army's commitment to improving the quality of housing stock on post, that the Army's budget request includes $50 million of new funding to build new homes and upgrade homes on post. I think that's a good sign. But I want to talk about how these funds are going to be deployed and how we can make sure that this is going to be a successful effort, given, General, as you pointed out, that we're already having some difficulties with scheduling. So in terms of the funds that have been approved for release, not the new appropriation that you're seeking, but the funds that have been approved for release from the Fort Gordon reinvestment account, has that money only been approved, or has it already been disbursed to Balfour Beatty?
I think the dispersal is imminent. It's been approved within the last couple of weeks, and if I'm correct?
Yes, yes, Senator. So the $5.1 million it will be dispersed pretty soon, and really there's two components of the $5.1 million. It's really to get after the abatement challenges I think that exist at Gordon, to include the asbestos and mold as they're looking at remodeling some homes there on existing homes. These are homes that are being remodeled, and they're getting after some of the challenges that they see as they go in and do the work. And so that's what the 5.1 is also to get after. There's about 118, I think, homes there that are currently offline. And so that 5.1 would also help bring those homes back online. To turn the work that's required in those 118 homes is probably going to take about 6 weeks per home, I think, and so they've kind of costed that out per home, and so that 5.1 million will get after those two areas, but that money will be dispersed pretty shortly to get after homes.
And General, where do we stand on the new construction?
Yes, great question. We had, of course, as Honorable Jacobson said yesterday, we had the meeting, and it just so happened that Balfour Beatty's time in the rotation was this time, and so the new construction there's my question I asked to them was hey, when are we going to start to see the construction at Pine Tree Terrace? I think that's the land that's currently blocked off that you and I saw. And really, to go there, it's 90, I think it's 97 homes, or 76 homes, I'm sorry, 76 homes that are going to be constructed there. So I asked them, when do we think we're going to be, seeing things being built up? They assured us, I think 60 to 90 days. I think there's some documentation that we have to get to them. One document I own. It's a document that they need in order to kind of start their progress. But the other piece is they had to go back, of course, because there was some costing factors now based on the original plan, which the costing came in a little bit under, and so now we're making some adjustments. That's where the other discussion about the difference between 10 million, I think $10 million or $15 million was at play, because there were some costing factors now that the escalation of costing and materials now have, over time, has caused the price to go up, and so that's kind of where the 10 million is coming into play. But we expect that they'll start construction here in about the next 60 to 90 days.
So I'm encouraged in the following sense. I've been shouting from the rooftops for the last couple of years that, and I know you agree, we need to get newly constructed, up to modern standard homes in at Fort Gordon for these families, because a critical contributing factor here is that the underlying housing stock is old, and that's no excuse for poor work to perform vital maintenance. That's no excuse for using duct tape on a furnace rather than fixing the underlying problems. But it's going to pose a continuous challenge to have old housing that's not up to standard. So we need new homes. And that's why I'm glad to see that the Army is taking steps to accelerate the construction of new homes. But here's my concern, General. Here we have a company that my last report, my current report, and both of your reports finds has real problems performing high technical quality workmanship. So how are you, General, going to ensure that these homes are well built, that they are up to a high standard of construction? And how are you going to get at that before it becomes a problem that's very expensive to remediate? Because we're going to be right back here again if a whole new round of homes are built, but they're not up to standard.
Right. Now, it's an important question, Senator. So I think first, I just want to say the significant changes that have happened over a very short period of time at Fort Gordon. And I'm sure you're aware, because we talked about it last week. The hiring of qualified leadership when it comes to the management of the company at Fort Gordon. It's important to know that they have made significant changes in leadership, and so now to have a full-time manager on ground, and not one that comes back and every now and then to check on maintenance and check on work, has been a game changer. I mean, that to have him on ground with the expertise that he has really gotten after the ensuring that quality is being done, not only quality of work when it comes to construction, but just overall customer service. I think the other piece that we've been able to implement, and Honorable Jacobson kind of talked about it, is really the communication at every echelon. A year ago, I would probably venture to say that we didn't necessarily have the weekly meetings that we're having now, to include the headquarters DA aspects, to really kind of have oversight over BBC. That didn't happen a year ago. The meetings were probably not as detailed. I think so. When you look at what the garrison commander and our MCOM commanding general has been able to implement, when we talk about weekly statuses of work, and that's from everything to work orders to major MILCON projects, the garrison commander along with the MCOM commander have really put the work in with regards to ensuring that the daily flow of requirements are being completed, and that's wrapped up in the weekly meetings. So that's something I think that has been a very success story for Gordon, and not only Gordon, but all of our installations, because they all go through the same sort of weekly meeting. And then to bring in, I think, the AMC commanding general and the headquarters DA leadership to give that quality of oversight has really put the onus on the company. It really has.
Thank you, General. My question, and Secretary Jacobson, I'd like to hear from you on this, and I just want to be as precise about this as possible. How are we going to make sure this construction is well executed?
I'd be happy to answer that. We just hired or we're in the process of hiring across the board 23 engineering specialists to be focused on housing and the structure of our housing. So they are going to be Army employees who are going to oversee construction activities. It's going to have to meet Army standards. And we're also going to have our consultant, the RER consultant, they're the ones who are overseeing the inspection program right now. I think you've met with some of them. They, too, are going to be on site overseeing this construction. This construction will be very closely supervised and monitored by Army personnel. And we've professionalized our own staff to be able to do that.
Well, thank you. And again, I appreciate how responsive you've been to the work we've done in the Senate. I know that you are deeply concerned by the stories that we heard today from families who are here. And it will be what we would say in Georgia is y'all's responsibility to ensure that this construction is well executed. If it's not, we're going to be right back where we have been. So I'll just close with this, and then I'll give you all the opportunity if there's anything that you didn't cover that you want to. But we have seen some signs of apparent progress. As you noted, more technicians on staff, more of a full-time management focus. We saw a response to your demand for a plan on gas safety. We've still got a long way to go. The quality of the maintenance work, the timeliness of the responses to requests for work orders. General, you and I were together last week, and we heard from a young woman with a little baby. Mm-hmm. And last summer, as you'll recall, General, after the failure of their HVAC, for months, it was over 90 degrees in the house. For months. Infant child. And we've heard from the families about the emotional toll that this takes on parents, the health impact on kids and on childhood development, and the impact it has on the morale and readiness of U.S. Army soldiers to defend the nation. So I'm sure you have no doubt that I'm going to remain focused on this. And apparent signs of progress need to become real, specific, measurable progress that is felt by the families on post. And when I return and hold another town hall with enlisted personnel, and I'll do it again later this year, I need to hear from them that their experience has changed meaningfully. I want you two to succeed at this. I don't doubt your commitment. I thank you again for being responsive to me and working with me. If there's anything you'd like to add in closing, now's your opportunity, or we can adjourn the session. General?
Okay, so there's just a couple of things. First of all, we're going to be as transparent as possible, not only with our obligation to Congress, but our obligation to our families. It's important that we do that. The second thing is communication. I think that's important. I know Honorable Jacobson said it previously, but we want to ensure that that the lines of communication remain open. And I think if our families have problems, then they need to make sure they know that they can talk to any of our organizations to help resolve it, and not necessarily try to figure it out themselves. That's not what we want them to do. And so we open that up. And then the last thing I want to say is we have commanders that are fully committed to ensuring the life, health, and safety of our families and our soldiers. And so we understand that there is an agreement, and there's partnerships, and there's money obligated, back and forth from families to these companies. But we can't lose the sight that commanders are there to fix problems. They are there to fix problems, and we would ask, and if it can't be resolved between the private company, that by all means, that's what commanders are there for. And commanders should be on the spot, ready to fix problems at their level. That's what they get paid to do.
Thank you, General. Anything in closing, Secretary?
Well, we thank you very much and your staff for working with us together to try to get at this problem. And we want to continue to work together, so we very much appreciate that collaboration, respecting, of course, your oversight role over us. And as General Vereen said, we want to be fully transparent. Also, the commitments we're making here and the importance of this to us is also at the Secretary of the Army level and Chief of Staff of the Army level. Every single day, they are deeply concerned about the quality of life of soldiers and families, and there's nothing more fundamental for quality of life than having safe, comfortable housing. So we are committed to getting that done.
Well, thank you. And at an appropriate time, when we've had the chance to see if the changes that you're making are bearing fruit, you'll join me again here to discuss the progress you've made, yes?
Absolutely.
General?
Yes, we will.
Okay, thank you. That concludes today's session. Thank you for your presence here today.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.